Segunda, o grande potencial de mercado e a atual possibilidades de regulamentação de jogos no Brasil nos darão mais motivos para decidir estabelecer nosso escritório lá.
Brazilian Federal Deputy Pompeo de Matos, for instance, believes casinos will be a vaccine for coronavirus, stating that taxing gaming money could jumpstart the country's economy in the wake of COVID-19.
Ele machuca a economia. E eu diria assim, para nós até ajudar a levantar a economia depois que passar a pandemia, uma das alternativas é, inclusive, legalizar os jogos. É uma alternativa perfeitamente possível, viável, eu diria assim, até necessária.
Assuntos como este, dentre outros, farão parte dos nossos debates em setembro.
Moving forward, we hope that our three pillar shows, SiGMA in Malta, SiGMA in Manila, and eventually SiGMA in Sao Paulo, will pave the way for iGaming communities to learn from, as well as do business with each other. I look forward to contribute to this and make iGaming truly a global phenomenon.
iGaming is truly becoming a global business. Europe, for instance, has become saturated, and gaming companies are starting to look at other continents, particularly Asia, with a market of over 4 billion potential players. That means you, as an iGaming professional, have to attend shows across the globe, and not just in one continent. Old shows must make room for new shows in emerging markets. In this short video, we will outline why SiGMA Malta, SiGMA Latam, and SiGMA Manila are worth investing in. Here's 3 main reasons. Reason 1. Emerging trends. When we started SiGMA back in 2014, we strongly believed that SiGMA must embrace all 3 verticals. Today's super affiliate, for instance, is fast becoming an operator, thanks to lower barriers to entry. SiGMA is and will remain the only 360-degree show that brings the entire industry, from C-level executive to super affiliates, under one roof. Given also the significant presence of integrated resorts in Asia and Latam, moving forward, we've decided to include land-based gaming. Reason 2. Emerging hubs. SiGMA is held in 3 iGaming hubs. Malta, the gaming hub in Europe. Manila, the undisputed hub in Asia. And Sao Paulo, a region with vast potential. Reason 3. Emerging tech. Moving forward, we're merging 2 large expos under one roof. Our iGaming show SiGMA, as well as our Emerging Tech Summit AIBC, will take place at the same venue and on the same dates, breaking boundaries for the 2 verticals to learn and feed off each other. So what are you waiting for? Get in touch with us today and let's work together. Our 3 summits will open new doors for you. Welcome to SiGMA. Welcome to the world's iGaming festival.
Well, it seems we had some small technical difficulties there on the live stream, but we are back. And just before we get into it, I would like to thank you all for joining us for our first day of the SiGMA Deep Tech Conference for the techies, the developers and software architects in the gaming sphere. Thank you so much for joining us. It's set to be a really exciting 3 days. Now joining me on the line, we have an exclusive partnership which will start off our SiGMA Deep Tech Day 1. We have Gigi Gatt and Christian Zammit joining me on the line. Well, it's great to be speaking to you both today. So starting off, can you talk us through this collaboration between EBO and BMIT?
BMIT Technologies and EBO have partnered on their mutual strengths to build an effective customer support tool to provide to our gaming customers who might be anywhere in the world. EBO are an AI company who help businesses help long-lasting, valuable customer relationships, whilst BMIT Technologies have been providing services to the iGaming industry for the past 15 years, and we're an IT managed services provider. And what we do is allow customers focus on the business whilst we abstract the complexity of managing IT solutions. This is a new product which is being delivered by BMIT Technologies and powered by EBO, and we're calling the product CX Virtual Agent. Whilst the primary objective is of course automating customer service, it is not just about that, it is also about customer onboarding, KYC, responsible gaming and marketing.
So we're discussing an AI product for gaming. Can you describe to our viewers what is this product about?
We're on a mission to bring the power of AI to customer service. Whether you are a small office or a larger iGaming setup, we're here to help, mainly by allowing the repetitive processes in your business to be automated through AI. So there are 5 things which we do really well. First, we are a cross-channel product, which means that you can be where your customer needs you to, whether it's Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, the web, or a native app. Secondly, our CX virtual agent never has a day off. Whether you're scaling up your requests or in a difficult time with a few requests, we give you the elasticity of service which you need in these times. Thirdly, our CX virtual agent supports up to 80 languages, which helps you go to market really rapidly. Fourthly, our virtual agent can hand over to a human whenever it is unable to understand the requirements of the end user. Lastly, we create a rich data set which helps you improve your product, your customer service operations, and also your service management.
And despite most companies putting their partnerships on hold during COVID-19, we have seen EBO and BMIT actually move forward and announce it exclusively during SiGMA Deep Tech. So thank you for that. Can you explain to our viewers a little bit more about what this partnership will bring?
The iGaming sector is facing a growing need to adopt technologies which help them cut costs, optimize efficiencies, and of course, protect profit margins. Customer demands are ever increasing. They expect instant support around the clock and ideally in any language in which they are comfortable with. Research which is available shows that 60 to 80% of all inbound customer traffic is repetitive in nature and hence ripe for automation. The BMIT EBO virtual agents can take the pressure off customer support agents and allow them to focus on more value-adding processes which enable things like customer onboarding, KYC, and solving real customer problems.
And can you tell us more about this virtual agent that is really powered by AI, and where does the customer service element come into this?
Sure, there are 3 key points over here. First, AI is not here to replace human activity, but it's here to augment it. In other words, AI takes over the repetitive linear question sets that typically hit your customer service, allowing your human agents to take over the more complex ones, which require human and emotional intelligence. Secondly, in your question, you asked about continuous improvement. We improve our CX virtual agents every single week for the entire period of the license, which means that we improve both the recognition of the language model, our ability to understand humans, but also the workflows and the dialogues which help you automate your processes. Lastly, our delivery. It's a consultative process, which means that we sit down with your teams and make sure that we understand their unique problems. Unlike off-the-shelf solutions, our conversations are built to fit the needs of your organization. And if you are here in the beautiful island of Malta, it means that our team is sitting down very close to you. It also means that we have the advantage of bringing our experience in the gaming sector right to your organization's benefit.
And it does sound really fascinating. Are you able to dive a little bit more into the technology side of things for our SiGMA Deep Tech audience?
Oh, certainly. We love explaining the product to our technical audience. So let's break it down into 4 blocks. On an infrastructural level, we have partnered with Microsoft. Both EBO and BMIT Technologies are Microsoft partners, which gives us the resilience, the quality of service, and the infrastructural robustness that we need to offer the solution to enterprise-level activities. On an AI level, we are focused on natural language processing and natural language understanding. This means that we don't only understand the content of what is being said by the human customer, but the context of that conversation, right? We can read between the lines to understand things like sentiment, emotional status, and the rich data set about the customer profile which resides in your CRM. And talking about CRM, this is the key third technical point. We have an open integration layer to all the major CRM products out there, which means that we can operationalize the data in your CRM and bring it in real time to personalize the conversation which we have with the human customer. And finally, we are entirely front-end agnostic. That means that we have abstracted our AI layer from the front-end channel which the customer will utilize to communicate with you. It might be a website, it might be a native app, it might be Facebook Messenger or any other tool. The channel which is utilized by the customer is chosen based on the cultural proximity between the customer and yourself.
So it sounds like from what you're saying, the ability to analyze and process data through AI is of huge benefits to companies in the gaming space. So can you give us a little bit more info when it comes to the advantage for operators?
Collecting customer data allows you to create a profile and consequently a better understanding of your customers. With this data, you can serve your customers better and you can actually predict the needs on known established patterns. The advantage of the BMIT CX virtual agent is that the data you collect from such customer interactions in combination with data which you attract from internal systems allows you to make such data more actionable and consequently more effective in the context of an entire customer workflow process. Being able to collect the right data is one thing, but making it extremely useful requires complete different mind and skill set. And this is where BMIT and DBO come to play.
So Chris, I have to ask, what advice do you have for companies that really are looking to stay ahead of the curve?
I believe that the companies of tomorrow will need an agile mindset and culture, which is focused on continuous improvement. Continuous improvement in customer service and support is of course key, and the development of an omni-channel service strategy is one area in this process where EBO and BMIT Technologies can help. The development of an omni-channel service strategy allows real-time customer data to be synchronized across all channels. So for example, in the iGaming world, a customer can start filling out an online application via his browser and then complete it via Messenger on his mobile without having to restart from the very beginning. Of course, an omni-channel experience doesn't mean trying to be everywhere with the same content or service whenever your customer needs you. It means more than that. It means being relevant to your customer where the customer expects such relevance to be. This is the future, using AI to bring you closer to your customers.
Well, now let's jump into our first theme of the day, big data, sponsored by Cloudflare. In the iGaming space, huge amounts of big data have to be processed at an enormous speed and making sure that all the data is impeccable and correct. So Igor is going to take it over now and have a discussion based on this. Let's take a look. Data in iGaming, managing data effectively, with Chris Arms, CIO, GiG, Carl Davis Barrett, WW Cloud Solution Architect, Microsoft Azure, and Leo Cohen, Software Architect.
Welcome to the first day of SiGMA Deep Tech. We're going to open the summit with a talk on big data in gaming. So as, well, whether you know or not, we as an industry process a tremendous amount of data. There's an anecdote which has been going around probably 10 or more years now, that an average tier 1 company will process more transactions in a minute than the London and the New York Stock Exchange combined. So as an industry that is removed from facing the customer, so we have that customer not present element, a lot of our strategies and a lot of our goals are oriented around analyzing customer behavior, storing that data and acting upon it. As such, we thought here at SiGMA that it's a great way to open the summit by talking about data in gaming. And for that, we have Chris Arms, we have Carl Davies-Bennett, and Leo Cohen with us. So we can chat about, have a conversation about system architectures, database architectures, tech stack, and good practices in building an architecture for small and large-scale operators within our industry. Hi guys, can you hear me well?
Yeah, morning.
Superb. Right, I wanted to sort of open the panel and talk a little bit about data architecture itself, right? So I think we're all in agreement. As an industry, we collect just a tremendous amount of data at any given point in time. And we run substantially complex systems, based on multiple continents for most of our operators, based on multiple regulatory zones. I was hoping for Chris to open up the topic here, actually, seeing as you're currently the CTO, of Gaming Innovation Group, and you guys do the data and the platform thing quite well, I would say, in the industry. So an opening chat. I mean, looking at this from a perspective of a solution architect currently operating as an operator or wanting to go into platform production zone, saying, maybe wanting to develop a platform. I wanted to open a topic on sensible tech stack and the architecture requirements for running an operation in this day and age in the iGaming, right? So what from GIG's perspective, what were the good practices that you've embarked on in terms of what you used, what kind of technology you used, and how you decided to build your data architecture?
Yeah, so thanks, Igor. From GIG's perspective, I think it's fair to say that the days of ETL have gone. ETL is, yesterday's news. Everything, regulatory requirements are increasingly event-driven, real-time. And that's really the design and architecture we've gone. Our latest version of the data warehouse, which our first customer went live with, a few months ago, Megalotto, and we'll continue for the rest of this year to roll out other customers and move our existing customers across. Is an event-driven data warehouse. ETL just takes more time than most of us have got. I mean, how many times can we all think back to when we had ETL warehouses? We'd come in the morning and find that the ETL load failed in the first 5 minutes, and the last thing we knew was at 7:30 in the morning, and it's going to be 1 o'clock in the afternoon before we get the data. That's just not an acceptable position anymore. So we adopted the approach and took a conscious decision to make technical investment in building a true event-driven real-time data warehouse, built on scalable open source tech. Think of it in 4 elements: source, ingest, lake, and consumer, I guess is the way to think of how our warehouse is structured. You can ingest data into the warehouse via your favorite, real-time event feed, so RabbitMQ or Kafka. Splunk is another one. We've also produced an API layer. So if you want to integrate directly into our APIs and, feed data in that way, there's an integration document, and you can essentially sign up and integrate your platform straight in that one.
Yeah, API allowing writing straight into the database in terms of information, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, very good.
Yep. We use tech like Kubernetes, Postgres, Apache Spark, and Ignite. Clearly the heavy lifting here is in the data mapping up front. It's really important to understand what data's, what the fields actually mean. versus what the field's names actually says, and make sure we map the right fields from your ingest into the right fields in the data warehouse. So a significant amount of work is there. Reporting, we use ClickSense, and you can update dashboards in real time. And our reality is most human beings can't read a dashboard that updates in real time anyway. So, and we spent a lot of time with consumers of reporting, figuring out what they want. We must have sat down with well over 100 or so operational users of, casinos and sportsbooks at all levels, from, the casino, the director of operations all the way down to the guy who sits in the...
I don't
Sorry,
mean
go on, Miguel.
No, I don't mean to interrupt you. I actually wanted to ask a sideline question here. Being a platform and servicing multiple operators, have you considered the capacity of allowing the operators and, as you said, various employees and various tiers of the company to actually build their own knowledge-based reports and learning from it? Or do you soak up the knowledge from what you've understood, from what you've seen is required within the industry, and pre-produced results and reports?
So you've got a choice.
Yeah.
You have a choice, essentially. So, obviously every jurisdiction has a standard set of reports. So if you go into MGA, for example, with our platform, you'll get the standard MGA reports.
Of course.
But, the beauty of something like ClickSense is you have the ability to sit down and write your own reports. But you can also, for want of a better phrase, ingest the data back out of the warehouse. We provide a SQL Server interface, which you can, pull data from directly if you like ingesting SQL Server. Or you can use Azure endpoints and take RabbitMQ or Kafka and integrate directly, for example, into your favorite CRM system. So we've designed it to be flexible in, flexible out, with scalable, robust, proven open source technologies in the middle, and giving you the flexibility to do essentially reporting, whether you want the CAN reports or whether you want to go off and write your own.
So from what I understand, from the perspective of the operator, you've chosen to take a direction where everything, the entire, both the ingestion of data, processing, and the output is run from the data warehouse, right?
Yeah.
You do it from a single point. So in terms of architectures, I've come across decisions where, let's say, the concept would have been split between what we want in terms of reactive data output in real time, and how we actually store the data that is required to be ingested in real time and acted upon, versus data that is historically aggregated and stored, right? So if we take a look at the customer journey in the initial phases is relatively light, right? You're going to take the customer source. I mean, in any e-commerce business, this isn't relevant to gaming. Simply, you're going to recognize where the customer is coming from. You're going to take a look at their first few initial interactions, and we're going to store that. But as we continue, and especially in this industry, considering we have so many interactions per customer, those averages and those kind of aggregations over time pile on and simply connect. I've seen architectures, concepts of architectures where the historic aggregation of data versus the need to access real-time data and react, real-time events, are split, where I think you've actually honed in on this. And you see, you have to prepare the data. You have to understand what you're looking at. And I think probably that's what you've meant in terms of sorting and understanding the data. Because at any given point in time, I would imagine the architecture of looking back 9 months of transactions is going to slow down the system. I can't imagine that the reaction speeds will be up to date with what we currently need. So how did you go about solving that problem? That would be my first question. So having easily accessible, rapidly accessible data that requires some deep calculations. And the second part of, I guess, the question would be if there are any architectures, both from Carl and Leo, if there are architectures that you are aware of or have in mind that allow a rapid access of data in this high transactional volume, right?
Yeah. So I mean, if you think about, you talked earlier on about transaction volumes, right, and just how much you do.
Yeah.
We're pushing, we're pushing north of 50 million a month through this. So it's a non-trivial amount of data volumes. In terms of the important thing is to understand your target state of what you want from a reporting perspective or what you want to query. So what we do is, clearly you can't, as you say, take a data that's just one flat table. That's impossible to query and impossible to manage.
Of course.
So what we've done is we build aggregated tables inside the warehouse that basically says, so I want to report on responsible gambling, right? Well, my deposit pattern is over in one table, my withdrawal patterns is over in another table, but I need to be able to, and my transaction history for that person is somewhere else, and my source of wealth data is over here somewhere in my KYC table. So to build an RG dashboard, I'm clearly going to need data from 4, maybe 5 tables. So what I then do is build a table that essentially takes the relevant data from those, aggregates them, and allows me to build, because you're right, otherwise if you don't do that,
effectively,
yeah, essentially, and it's not difficult, and it's really easy to do because we've built the table, we built the underlying database table, really well. And in terms of, and if you look at the SQL Server, you can look at the SQL Server access and go, actually, that makes sense. And we've not got database. It's simple things like we've not got field names that are ABC. We've got field names that are actually meaningful. How many of us have looked into a database and gone, what did they mean by that field name? So it's about those practices all the way up from design and to ultimately build into those tables. And I see Leo was smiling in the middle of that, so I'll let him comment.
Yeah, of course. Leo, you have a comment on that?
Yeah, so look, it boils down to read versus write optimization. So obviously from my experience, aggregations are all the rage here because you can't really read a flat, huge table full of data. Not if you're doing anything massive enough, which means you're going to keep buckets and aggregations for shorter periods of time. But you really, like you guys said, you really do not need to know in advance what it is that you're looking to get out of that data. Now, one thing that popped into my head during Chris's good explanation of this problem is materialized views in a way, which means you're essentially making a read optimization at the cost of writes. But from my experience, writes can be easier to scale sometimes if you know what you're doing. And in this particular case, writing into aggregates, buckets, and like understanding the time range of the data you want and the grouping of how it is that you want your data to be grouped really helps in this. But it's really not one of those generic solutions. You really do need to understand the domain and the problem scenario that your data is actually trying to help you. It's not take a generic solution and it's going to work somehow.
Yeah, in fact,
you need to understand it.
That's sort of what I've extracted from this in terms of if I were to sort of put a message across. It is key, I believe, in preparation. So I think it's a massive part of architecture is down to product design, understanding, as you said, understanding the domain, understanding the product. And it is a matter of continuous communication with the product teams and the users to understand what it is that we look out for. I think one of the challenges is, looking forward, because I think we enter into a loop. I mean, not to speak overly technical, if you look at this, irrelevant what industry we speak about, if I'm a product user, I'm a product guy. I've designed platforms in the past, but I've always owned the casino, right? So I've always looked at it from a player perspective. So, it comes to the old adage, you don't know what you don't know. So if I understand that this is the information from a platform provider, right? This is the information I have available. This is the kind of calculations I can do, right? Then I think there is a learning curve, even from the product perspective, like a loop, where the people who are responsible for engaging a customer, expanding their life cycle, understanding the behavior, get to a place where they can envisage what more we can produce, deduce, and react on based on that kind of feedback loop between the architecture designers, between the people who are building the systems and the product guys that are using it, right? And I think that there does arrive a point where that kind of, I would say, equilibrium is achieved, where the domain knowledge can be imparted, not just based on, hey, we need the basics, but could we create this? Could we go this far?
One thing I would...
Please. No, go for it.
I was going to say, I don't think it's a black and white decision, as you said. Whenever you're building out a platform, and we work with the likes of Gig and other platform providers, you got to think of functional requirements. Is it format, size, consistency of the data? You got to think of non-functional requirements from performance, management, cost, security. There's a bunch of decisions you have to make, and It's never a single gray area of a single solution fits all. We see a lot of technologies coming together and playing nicely. So if you take something like, and this is not a product advert, but if you take something like Cosmos DB, you can do key value store or document DB store. You can choose the data format and API which best suits the job that you're doing. Yeah. And what we find when we're talking about this data writes versus reads, if you look at a typical document DB, data that's queried together should live together, right? So we allow that to happen and optimize. And you have to look at the relationship.
Can we use this as a soundbite? I really want this. Data that queries together lives together. No, well done, well put.
Yeah, no, and I think it's, and it goes back to the adage, do you embed or do you reference? And, you do get better write performance if you reference. If you do embed, you get, better read performance. So it's having those tools in the platform that lets you make those decisions. Lior.
No, I think that's valuable, very valuable. There's something I want to cover a couple of topics, and I want to roll on from one topic to another in the limited amount of time that we have. So one of the aspects that I want to cater for is the industry verticals themselves, right? So we spoke about the amount of transactional data, but it's as you say, it's not black and white. So if we, for example, take a look at the casino players, and the casino as a product vertical, it is a consistent call, read and write on the transaction table. So the transactions and wallet influences, right, balance influences are continuous. And there's a lot of moving pieces, right? You have third-party suppliers, you have bonuses that are involved, probably more aggressively than I would say in case of sportsbook. We have a lot of elements happening on a continuous basis and on continuous course. Right? So I would say that, and of course, there's the necessity for speed of response. So I believe that the industry benchmark of what's acceptable in terms of closing of the round is 150 milliseconds per round, I believe, about. Chris is shaking his head. Am I up or down? 100, 150, yeah? I mean, that was, from our test, that was something acceptable. But obviously, lower the better. Whereas if we take a look at the sportsbook vertical, right? If we look at the transaction frequency leading up to a market, leading up to a bet, it is incremental. You have in play, we have volume, and then we have resolution, which is an absolute spike, right? So managing the resource allocation per product, first and foremost, in terms of how we structure databases, both hardware and software varied, and managing the resource allocation in terms of peak times and standard. I wanted to gain your take on approaching the industry in terms of architecture with such a varied product vertical and such varied demands. Yeah. So if we take these two base examples, one is up, down, and the other one is consistent. So how do you go around that issue? Right? How do you go around that approach, and how do you solve for it? Anyone can start. I imagine Chris has something to say considering the gig and platform, but anyone can take this.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I'll start off and let the others dive in. So, I mean, the important thing is performance and scalability testing. It's a challenging world because it's one of those things that everybody expects you to do, and almost nobody's prepared to pay for until the day it breaks, and then they go, "Why didn't you scalability and performance test this?" And it's challenging, but my simplistic view on this is you've got to have a mirror of what you have in production to do a proper scale and performance test. I mean, if you don't, you're never going to get there. And you've actually, my view is that if the designer designs it to support 20x, then you know what? The performance guys need to test it to 40x and see what point it breaks. And it's you have to. Sorry, go on.
No. I mean, we're looking at here cost-benefit ratio in that case, right? Because I mean, looking from someone at the scale and size of gig, fair enough. I wouldn't say unlimited wallet, but considering the technology is the cornerstone of what you do, then by all means you create your own hardware architectures, and you need to make sure that it works and you fall into it. But let's take a look at the mid-tier operator, right? Who effectively needs to achieve the same kind of scalability and ability to freely market and allow for peak times. But in the investment in the hardware required It is substantial, you know. It does, especially in the early stages, comparative to the operating cost. It is substantial. So we have Carl here. I actually want to grab you two and your take on managed hosting solutions, on cloud solutions, and where sort of, I mean, speaking openly, speaking honestly, of course, where does that curve sort of kind of break and say, hey, you know, cloud may not be the solution anymore. We need to move away from that. But there is a cost benefit to cloud up until a certain point. Yeah. Where do we stand on this?
I think there's a sweet spot to be achieved with cloud. And if you look at what you were just saying, I mean, yes, you should design for failure, right? I mean, all systems will fail at some point. So any cloud designed application takes failure into mind so that it cascades gracefully, you know, the errors don't, you know, propagate and make the situation worse. But going back to your first point, if you had some steady loads, yes, you can go with, you know, virtual machines in Azure, any cloud for that matter, and you can reserve instances up front. So you can make cost savings because you know how much you're going to spend. We're going to give you some of that back. May still be more beneficial for you to put it on-prem, depending on, you know, the jurisdiction of the data and other requirements that bring it. But I think the spike in the peak loads and the testing to destruction, as Chris puts it, is fantastic for cloud because you can spin up a full-blown XXX production environment, you know, burn the hell out of it, you know, build load agents which can really kind of hammer your system and then switch them off. So, you know, you're only paying as you use. So cloud really finds a nice sweet spot there. Yeah,
there is definitely, I mean, there's definite cost benefit ratio there. Absolutely. One of the things that I sort of wanted to cover for and cater for as we talk about resource allocation, as we talk about hardware architectures and investment costs, right? I wanted to cater to the fact that we're multi-regulated and multi-regional, right? So we cater to customers across continents. We effectively, I mean, Chris, you've said it, everything boils down to a data warehouse, right? So if you have players playing from Asian or especially as a platform that serves multiple customers in multiple regions, right? If you have customers across continents, eventually, essentially reconciling into your data warehouse in order to pull the reports and understand customer behavior and do the necessary segmentation. The server farms, right? The solution of actually investing in those server farms, having always on state and redundancy state in each one of those server farms, and allocating for ping and content delivery network. This is partly why I felt it was interesting to have a cloud solution architect on here, because as an operator moving up in terms of scale, right, moving up in terms of expansion of the regions and regulatory requirements, these are very real questions that we must confront, right? Each region carries an investment. So I actually want to roll back to Chris here in terms of your take on multi-regions. I know Leo had something to say about reconciliation of data and speed of access, and I want to see the sort of cloud solution take on that. So looking at multi-regional approach, where do we stand here?
So, you know, our approach is where we possibly can centralize in one location on the planet. That gives you scalability, both infrastructure-wise, physical infrastructure, but also operational scalability, because it's a lot easier to manage a bigger server farm in one location remotely. And then use technology, you know, things like Cloudflare, edge caching, for example. It can be a big part of that. And if you're in one location, for example, which is, you know, one of the big global data center providers, where they've got multiple buildings on the same site, and you can host across two of those buildings with hundreds of gigabit dark fiber between the two. You can actually afford in those scenarios to have essentially a copy of what you've got in one. And I was talking about how you do destruction testing. You can actually use your failover site as that environment up front. And then when you need it, you can fail over to it. And obviously you've got to put all the appropriate backup.
In that case, you're talking about failover and disaster recovery, right? Yeah. So effectively have an idle state, which we're using for testing. But if you have active players streaming from multiple continents, then those server farm allocations are actively being used, are they not?
Well, so in terms of the DR site, you have to, if you're really going to meet the RPOs and RTOs that we're increasingly being asked for in this industry, the only way you can realistically achieve that is with a failover system that's essentially hot as it can closely be. And you've got to make sure you do things like real-time stream your data back up to that site. Testing is important, right? It's great saying I've got a DR plan. When was the last time you actually tested it? So you can do that, and where possible, we want to drive everybody into one data center, because also it's just cost optimized all the way around. Now, we recognize that there are some jurisdictional requirements on that. Some jurisdictions insist that whilst you don't host in the jurisdiction, you keep a copy of the data in the jurisdiction. So essentially, you have to stream the data to it. But some, like the US, in New Jersey, you've got to be in a casino inside a licensed premises. So in New Jersey, you've got to be in the basement of that casino, and that makes it harder. And honestly, the challenge with those is that that's more expensive all round, both for us and for the operator. So if we can get that economies of scale, we can do so much more with it. And then to Carl's point, where we do need that burst capacity to go off and do something else, you can flip into the cloud.
Yeah, I mean, mixed approach. Yeah, a blended approach might be the solution here. Here, I know I've had conversations with you in the past. I know you've had your take on this, on catering for the speed of data access and resource allocation from multiple locations around the globe. Right?
Yeah. So to touch a few of the points that were made earlier, one thing that I would like to stress is you really do need to target something like Kubernetes to allow yourself the portability, which really hides away the differences between deploying on bare metal or cloud. And as Carl and Chris would agree with me, I don't think there's a single cloud in the world today that doesn't support that. Now, as for having the ability to fail over, actually holding physical hardware, especially large clusters, can get pretty cost prohibitive. So I would actually ask, Chris about his thoughts on this regarding whether or not it's sensible, given infrastructure as code and the ability to spin up resources very fast on the cloud, whether you could actually spill to the cloud as a disaster recovery or the ability to cascade things and spill in case you have errors with your own cluster. Is that a possibility? And in general, I would say that beginning in a new region, I would actually not go and buy servers and take a rack and run a cluster. I would actually start with a cloud there and get a feel for the amount of the scale I would need there before I actually invest into hardware and get into the upfront cost of that. That's my take on the matter.
Yeah, I mean, when we were building the data platform, we did a bunch of performance scalability testing in the cloud. We actually, we picked what would be kind of a fairly minimal config in Azure, and threw 1,000 TPS at it, and then threw 5,000 TPS at it, and figured out how it would scale. So to your point, I think as your business evolved, you've got an opportunity to go to use the cloud, and as Carl alluded to earlier, to use it where it makes sense. And once you start getting into the scenario of scale where you've got to do regular performance testing, because performance testing is a lifestyle, right? It's not I did it on a Friday afternoon and it's fine for the next 2 years. A number of times people have said, I performance tested this. When was the last time? Oh, 2 years ago. Yeah. Okay, so we need to do it again then, probably. So you've got to have a flexible approach. Absolutely, you've got to decide when to use it all melds together, and to your point, you've got to have a hybrid deployment strategy. Yeah. It's the only way to really go forward.
I know, Carl. I mean, performance testing is a lifestyle. Is something I'm going to keep as a soundbite as well. By the way, we have a couple of them. I know. Carl had something to say about. Obviously, we're speaking about cloud solutions. So, as a cloud solution architect, I really want to hear your take on this.
No, I think Lior was right on the portability. Everybody's coming to us with portability, and the key takeaway is, Microsoft is not locking into vendors anymore. It's saying, listen, bring, if you want to bring a Hadoop cluster and run it yourself, fine, do that. You want to do Kubernetes yourself, do that. But where we see a lot of, cheap experimentation is really good. Like, you can come and you can pay as you grow, as Chris said. But you don't need to bring a lot of expertise with you. So, if you're not a Kubernetes shop, but you want to be portable, then put it on a managed service, right? I mean, have a managed service which, inside the platform itself, we will take care of the high availability. Now, that's a decision which an operator or a platform has to choose. Do they want to control the keys to the kingdom, or do they feel they can invest their IP in other places? And we give you the choice.
Yeah, I mean, look, honestly, just from the perspective of sort of where we're headed, I see this trend in multiple industries, multiple facets of life. Leasing versus buying, right? There's even a concept where, leasing various elements of use in every day is simply a healthier approach, because it's managed, it's serviced, it's there, and you pay as you use. And I think that's probably one of the cornerstones of the rise of the cloud solution. I've seen it more and more across my clients. I do believe that at some point in time, managing your own hardware and managing your own hardware infrastructure, simply you grow to a size that kind of control, the keys to the kingdom, are necessary, right? Because you can't rely on third-party quality control. You have to have internal accountability. And I think probably, especially in industry positions such as gigs, such as B2B service providers, keep in mind the platform is the heart and soul of an operator, right? It's the beating heart and is the brain of an operator. It holds the wallet, it holds the transactions, it holds player management. I would even argue outsourcing that is a high risk undertaking, and choosing the right platform is probably the most critical thing, most critical aspect of an operator success, make it or break it. Because shifting the platform halfway through an operation, I've done it, and it's just not a good experience. So I do believe that the cloud solutions are there, and they're an excellent contributor to the hardware infrastructure. I do think that at a certain point in time that, we need the keys to the kingdom for various aspects. There's the regulatory demands as well. Look, we're running out of time here, and what I wanted to just extract sort of the imparted lessons and the summary of kind of what we've covered, right? I wanted to. I know that we've talked about planning for data and domain understanding. I think in terms of architectures, we agree that before we talk about hardware and before we talk about the tech stack, I think understanding the data sets are probably key to building healthy architectures. And I think one of the definitive lessons that I've extracted from this is that blended approach to hardware setup, to understanding use of cloud, especially when we're looking at global attack on the global market, having that hardware infrastructure core, but utilizing the cloud infrastructure as well. Is there anything else that you want to add on to this conversation? And something sort of for the solution architects out there, for the platform providers out there, people that are building within this high transactional e-commerce space, good practices or some, elements to look
One
for.
One thing I would actually add that loops back to the data aspect that we spoke about earlier is you can't unscramble scrambled eggs. And this is something that you alluded to when speaking about, you don't know what you don't know. So,
right. I think I'm getting something in my earpiece. I believe that we're out of time, and I need to cut this short. Guys, this was very enjoyable on my part. Thank you very much for your time. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye, guys.
Yeah.
Well, a big thank you to Chris, Carl, Leo and Igor there for our first official panel of SiGMA Deep Tech. And also the feedback that we are getting through from Swapcard and the SiGMA platform has been great. Thank you all so much for sharing your comments. As I have mentioned, SiGMA Deep Tech will be going on for the next 3 consecutive days. So if you do have some questions that you do want answered, drop a comment in the engagement box below and we'll be getting back to you any time soon. Now, our next topic will be focusing on data as the previous one, but now we'll be focusing specifically on real-time data, where speed is going to need to be a huge factor. So let's take a look at the next panel discussion. Real-time data, lifecycle engagement and customer management challenges with Gigi Gatt, CEO at EBO, David Sachs, CEO at Tomobox, and Johan Zamit, founder and CEO Smart Studios.
Hi, welcome everyone. We've had a wonderful chat on data in iGaming and the amount of data that we process in iGaming. I think that panel was fantastic. One of the topics we've touched on in that panel is the need and necessity for real-time data processing. And we come to customer engagement today, and the competitive nature of our industry simply demands for us to preempt and react on customer behavior movements. Now, we are an e-commerce industry, and as an e-commerce industry, we don't have the customer present. We don't understand, we can't see them in the shop, we can't see their behavior. What we can analyze is their behavior on site. And whereas if we roll some time back, I believe that you could recognize that the way data was captured was simply customer interacts with the site. We collect that data. That data is stored, aggregated, averaged. We try and manage it however we can. And then some person at some product vertical sitting in some office would use the reporting tools to create some sort of understanding of customer behavior, and then reactively, days later, weeks later, approach and try to manage customer behavior. Today we have the technology that not only allows us to do this, but with the technology growth, we have reached a point where it's quite necessary to have real-time customer engagement. We're looking at even from a regulatory perspective, from a responsible gambling perspective, it is now expected for us to have preemptive designs. So on a panel here with me, talking about real-time engagement, talking about customer management and AI aspects to that, I have Gegegat, who is the CEO of EBO. I have David Sachs, who is the CEO of Tomobox, and I have Johan Zamit, who is the founder and CEO of Smart Studios. Guys, welcome.
Hi, Igor.
I wanted to open the conversation, actually to roll on the conversation from the previous panel that I've just sat on, which talked about data in iGaming. And I want to open it up. I want to have your take on the data architectures, very specifically. I'll sort of introduce the topic, and I'd like your feedback on the topic at hand. As I've mentioned, data is collated and averaged and aggregated, right, over time. Now, the nature of our customers, and I believe you understand this, all three of you have been integral to the industry. I've known about you for probably more than a decade now. The journey of a customer lasts for months at a time. And the amount of interactions that the customer will perform with an operator is immense. It's staggering. So those data points are averaged, assessed, aggregated, and then we've now reached very recently a stage where those aggregations, those data points, those assertions about customer behavior need to be pulled and reacted on. Now, I have two questions for you. Neither one of the three of you has functioned as an operator, right? Internally. You're all third-party suppliers and help operators move their real-time engagement. Now, in terms of, and specifically I pointed that out because from a perspective of a third-party supplier, in terms of speed of data access, in terms of speed of ability to read and probably educate your customers what is necessary, and then react and allow them to react on the customer behavior, I'd really like your take on what you have seen are good practices in terms of data architecture, of how data is served, stored, and your understanding on the customer's domain knowledge and what it is they should be storing, right? Sorry for a long intro, but I hope it was clear enough. Any one of you can start on the topic that you feel comfortable with. What's your take on this?
Right. Thank you, Igor. And I'll kick off with that, right? So first of all, it's really interesting that you speak about the customer journey. I think gone are the days when we could think of the customer journey as being purely linear and single channel. I think we have multi-point journeys in omni-channel environments. And I think it's critical for us vendors to map to this particular customer journey the specific business pain points which we see in the industry and how a technology can specifically serve against those pain points. Now, your question specifically asked about best practices in data architecture. EBO recently conducted a survey amongst the iGaming industry in Southern Europe. And what we found is that 60% of operators have some type of front-end engagement tools, and around 80% of them have a CRM tool. But the data from these two tool sets is in no way integrated. So not only do you have a disruption in the data management across these different tool sets, but you have the inability to consolidate meaning, right, from this data. And I think this is the key point which we need to make here around best practice, is that it's one thing to collect data, but it requires an entirely different skill set to make that data actionable. Absolutely. And that is, I think, what we need to do today. And in conversational AI, what that means for us is that on an engagement level, we're not simply understanding the content of that which is being said at an engagement front, but also the context of that Absolutely. Information, and making that operational is really the key to success in the general approach towards the architecture of the solution.
Absolutely. David, you have a take on that, Johan?
So yeah, that's very interesting. I'd like to propose a term which I think sits well with what Giga said, is that we're living in the 100 millisecond economy. Because everything Giga just says has to happen within that scale. If it goes a little bit longer, you just lost your player. Absolutely. That's one thing, and I'll try to talk about the architectural implication about that. The other thing is we look at two elements of data: cognitive, which is conversational, chats, emails, is what you think, and numeric, what you do. These are two different unstructured data that we're trying to merge and get insights out of. So that is very, very challenging. And that's just as an opening. As for the architecture, I think we're all into building small microservices that are very, 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 very flexible to deploy, to maintain, and to develop. You don't want a big bulky code in any of your services. You're following new practices that have never been used before, like immutable service, a service that can only talk about one thing and output another thing. And the other thing is your whole deployment chain. For that to be in the 100 millisecond economy, you want to make sure that it goes from end to end, from the click on your React.js screen, gone into your Kafka, Mongo, and went out with some kind of advice reaction. If not, now,
while inside Kafka Mongo performs a set of calculations, right?
Right.
As well.
A set of course, you've got the little service that does the magic. Let's say it's your AI deployment, it's your models. And just one thing about our industry. In a bank, in a transaction, you go in, you do your transaction, hopefully it's fast, you leave, that's it. But in gaming, there are hundreds of transactions, clicks, you have the side bets, you have the game itself, you may interact with the dealer if you're live there. So it is a very unique environment, not found in any other industries, and correct me if I'm wrong. So just to put the challenges mapped out for our discussion.
No, I absolutely agree with that. I have some points, but I'd like to bring them forward. Johan, you have any take on this?
Yeah, of course. You started by saying know your customer is the first commandment, obviously, of any company, and especially of gaming companies. Gaming companies are a mix of marketing and technology, and obviously knowing your customer is a super important thing. It's the prime thing, actually. Now, through time, we are moving from before. Initially, we had no data. Then we started moving data. We started storing lots of data. Now we're moving into applying AI to data and moving into real time. Now, even storing data and getting insights every day is already a challenge. And taking this to real time is a further challenge, but it is actually doable. There was one key thing when you asked me to be on this panel. I found a survey from Salesforce, which is one of the most popular CRMs out there, and it says that in 2020 the top challenge of marketeers is actually of real-time engagement. So what we're discussing here is not something futuristic. It's not something. It is the biggest challenge that they have right now. It also says that 84% of the marketers are actually using AI already. So we're in good shape there. However, there is a lot to do until we arrive to mixing the real time and the AI together. We're slowly getting there, but the amount of data points, you mentioned data points. This report mentioned that companies have a mean of 16 data points, and when I say data points, it could be the CRM, it could be from emails, it could be from their ticketing systems, from their websites and the analytics. So it goes on and on and on. Their chatbot. So there is a lot of data. But I think with technology, step by step, we are really getting there.
I mean, there's a couple of things really interesting that you mentioned this. So one, I want to unpack AI as we go through this conversation, because so far, purposefully, I haven't brought AI into it because real-time engagement does have layers. And AI is particularly where we're headed and what we must address. It's one of the, did I get you right? From a Salesforce survey, you've collected that the median number of data points is 16, 16?
16, yeah.
Yeah, so if you look at the gaming industry, we haven't scratched the surface with 16 data points, right? So that's how uniquely positioned we are. I want to roll back just one step. And bring around the question to the three of you, exactly oriented over data and domain understanding. So when we look at the data architecture, before we go into hardware, whether we use Kafka, whether we use RAM databases, which is something I would really like you to give me your input on, the domain understanding and the domain knowledge of the operators and the marketing users themselves. I mean, I've mentioned the user journey, and Gege continued on that topic. If we take a look at the customer journey over time, the transactions, the deposits, withdrawals, the bet sizes, the balances, the behavioral patterns of bet to balance ratios. I'm going to not even go into marketing and customer engagement from the perspective of upsell. I'm going to look at it from the perspective of regulatory requirements as they stand today. And if we have a customer who has built a certain pattern of behavior over time, over 3, 5, 6, 9 months of lifetime, deposit size, pay-in size, withdrawal size, the amount of bets, the size of bets, the nature of the games they play. Right now we're at a stage where we are required to recognize deviation from that pattern in order to prevent problem gambling. And we are required to do that in real time. In fact, as an owner of a casino, as an operator, ex-operator of a casino, I can tell you that that demand has stemmed to a point where we have fraudulent customers knowing such real-time expectation on us that they change and modify their behavior, spend a lot, immediately go on chat and go, I want my money back, you haven't caught me on time, right? So when we look at data points in specific, I would like your opinion on 2 points. One, how do you approach the correct aggregation process, right? How do you educate your customers, or if you take an operator hat on, how would you educate your team what to look out for and how to recognize, there's that adage, you don't know what you don't know. How to recognize what they can extract from the basic data set. That's one. And two, when we are talking about real time, we are talking about two things in particular. If we are aggregating historic data, then technologically speaking, and please correct me if I'm wrong, going back a transaction trail, especially aggregated transaction trail across all the customers you have on your platform, going back 6 months, I mean, that's a call that's going to come back in, let's continue this conversation tomorrow, right? Mm-hmm. So the necessity for correct aggregation paired with the event-driven design. So today we are event-driven. We need to react in real time. So where do you draw that balance? Where do you draw that separation? And how do you merge the two, right? Both from the hardware perspective, what you use, RAM databases or so on, and from the software perspective. I hope I made myself clear, and I'd like to hear your take.
I think it's.
Let me jump in this time and pick up on your question, and not to sound too marketing. I think we're moving from the CRM reactive era to the AI proactive era, because that's what you said. You want us to react right now and not do a post-mortem based on the historical things, because anomalies, and that's what we're looking for, are happening all the time. So that's the world that you're working. The second thing, unpacking AI, which is a great term, and I'm going to use that in the future, is first thing that data scientists know is that most of it is not invested in the algorithm. It's not even invested in your mathematics. It's invested in massaging your data. Because if you don't know what kind of data, and I'll be more specific in a second, then the machine doesn't care. So we invest 70% of our time articulating the data, specifically building what we call feature vectors. What are feature vectors? These are the 16 points that Johan mentioned, but we don't use 16, we use 1600. That's the size of a feature vector that we usually try to run in a model. And you're asking me a good question, Igor. How do you know? Well, the frank answer is we don't. So there's a lot of trial and error until you get to the pattern that you're looking. And I'll talk a little bit later. I have a sample of RG, but each case is different. So you are running multiple models. That means you might have a model for RG. You might have a model or several models for fraud. You might have a model for AML, which is a totally different challenge. So the data people are very much important here, and they are doing a lot of non-glaring work.
You haven't even touched marketing there. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, and I'm not into marketing.
There's a whole
I'm trying to build the
there,
data structure. So I laid out the foundation by saying we invest a lot of time in feature vectors, and I let my other panelists complete the picture, and how do we actually run that pipeline. Thank you.
Yeah. I think we need to be thinking about moving from an event-driven type of strategy, which is reactive in nature, to an event-triggered, which is more predictive in nature. I think the environment which we're building today is one which is increasingly predictive, Igor. And I'd say that even when we have a defined scope and we're using very simple linear regression, our predictive abilities are already significantly accurate, especially in areas where you have very linear processes. So I think you are correct in explaining that the iGaming industry is so particular and so complex with so many layers. However, a lot of the processes which occur in gaming are linear in nature, which create the right model, the right opportunity for us to predict outcomes. But I think another interesting point for us to explore is this idea that generally a lot of the AI models that we look at create some form of classified data, right, from existing data silos. And we use that then to create the predictive model. I think we are going to be moving very rapidly into an environment whereby we need to start data enrichment exercises from blending in data from external third-party sources to be able to better inform us of the outcomes of our models. And if you allow me, Igor, I'll give an example which is pertinent to these, COVID days that we are going through. So we're a London-based organization, and we're looking very closely at how the British government was looking at reopening the economy. And they created a predictive model to try and study the impact that weather conditions, external third-party data source, right? Weather conditions would have on the reopening of pubs in central London and the impact on the tax computation. Because any pub owner is going to say, is it worth me opening? Am I going to make enough money based on the taxes and the rent which I need to pay? And the weather is a key determinant. So this is just one very simple example which shows that the models of data within gaming are linear, but could become enriched through the infusion of third-party data, which will allow us to be much better at RG requirements or particular predictions, which help the growth of the operator's business.
Very good. Very good. I couldn't agree with you more. Johan.
Yeah. Igor, actually, I don't 100% agree with you that hardware and technology is our biggest challenge at the moment. The amount of technological power that we have right now is nowhere near what we had till a few years ago, and to achieve real-time AI-enhanced customer experience, I think we have much bigger challenges than the hardware. But I'll give you a bit of insight about hardware too. So hardware is still a very important component which we shouldn't forget about.
I mean,
now,
just to clarify, it's not necessarily a challenge, but I do understand the need to segregate the type of data that we're serving, right? There is a need between real-time segregation, event-driven segregation of data versus aggregated historic data points, because it's the blend of the two, the trends of the past versus the current behavioral patterns that give us the insight, I believe, in order to react onto a customer. So rather than a challenge, what more specifically I'm honing at is how do you structure that? Historic aggregations, where do you store them? How do you store them versus real-time response and engagement? And is a single database okay for that? You know, is it SQL? Can SQL cut it?
I think the biggest challenge, and I'm just following on what Johan said, is right. We have an abundance of technology and hardware, and now we've just moved from one problem to the other side. Because if you want to maintain real time, Igor, you're going to fall in. Do you want to ask me something?
I want to allow Johan to finish because I've interrupted
him.
Oh,
sorry. My bad. I thought he was trying to support his argument.
Yeah, so just to go quickly answering your question, Igor. You mentioned, I think, SQL Server now. So in storing data, there is not just one level. So it's not just having a structured or unstructured data store and you store all your data there. There are levels of data. So a lot of data is aggregated in, for example, what they use the name data lake, for example, as a lower level. From there are data warehouses which are built from the data lakes. From the data warehouse, you said segregating. There are data marts that are built from the data warehouse, and this can keep also going depending on a specific.
I think I understand, and I want to see whether Gege and David agree on this. I believe what the information I'm extracting from here is effectively creating data pools, data aggregation pools relevant to the topic at hand. So we're not talking about one data lake. We're streamlining and we're aggregating and we're actually moving into relevant topics, right? Similar data points that we could be looking at, and that's where we pull from.
And another point is between on-prem and the cloud. Nowadays, all the providers, Microsoft with Azure, Google with their Google Cloud, Amazon, IBM, they all have their cloud, and the cloud also have a lot of readily available machine learning models already. So it depends how big your operation is, but you could also move part or all of your processing, not just having hardware, whatever, at a Yeah, go ahead.
Because I know that we have a few minutes left, and I want to tap into the machine learning, because we've been circling around it. We haven't actually honed in on it yet. I know that David has something to say about the learning mechanisms. And I want to take Gege's point on unpacking AI. You know, where does, my actual question is, where does AI become an I? Yeah, where does it become an intelligence rather than a simple rule engine? Yeah. So David, if you could take a minute or two, and Gege respectively,
Sure.
I think we can wrap up the chat.
Sure. So for the audience, and just moving on from the thread that Johan started, my first slide is just tell the audience, if you want to know something about artificial intelligence or machine learning, there's basically two types that you need to know of. The left one is supervised learning, and the other one is unsupervised learning. Supervised learning means that you take an algorithm like SVM and you feed it with trainable data. That means data that has been tagged. For example, I would show it a few deposit and withdrawals, and this is typical to a compulsive player. I have 1 million of those. I teach the machine, this is a compulsive player. Whatever is not similar is non-compulsive. So you get two planes, you get one plane, compulsive player, the other plane, non-compulsive player. That is simplifying supervised. The issue is, the challenge, Igor, is we don't have all that tag data. We don't have all that tag data ready for us to feed the machine. So what do? We want to use unsupervised learning, which is a clustering kind of algorithm that will put the groups of players in groups by itself. I didn't tell it anything. It's trainable about, it's looking for something that the machine doesn't know what it's looking for.
How do you validate the correctness of data? Surely there's a supervising layer.
Right. So the supervising layer for the unsupervised learning is the human. We look at the groups created or the topics created by the machine, and we say, oh, this sounds like a guy who's going to kill herself. And let me show you slide number 2, if they can put it out. This is an actual chat from a live dealer that we picked in real time. And what does he say? My girlfriend has just left me because I lost all my money to the casino. Now, this is, upon regulation, something that has to be alerted immediately, and not 30 days later when it's post-mortem, not only for the incident, but the guy might have killed himself, right?
Yeah.
So this is the type of, specifically, we use an algorithm here. One of them is called LDA, latent directly allocation, that is an unsupervised topic detection. So if you have that in your funnel, which will Gege will probably talk about, this is an actual case, how you use it and find a I. What is I? The insight that you're looking for, saying, hey, you better watch this guy. Everything might be okay. He might be joking, but it's definitely a red flag.
Gege,
right?
You had something to say.
Let me unpack the I in AI, right? Well, I'll start off by saying that I think machines today and the capabilities we have are becoming less artificial and far more intelligent, right? So in other words, the systems we build rely less on bottom-up big data and more on top-down reasoning. It closely resembles the way we humans approach problem solving and tasks. So the usefulness of AI is growing because it doesn't remain related to the very narrow domain, but becomes more involved in decision support, if you wish. And I think the eye of AI is particularly relevant over here because we're seeing our tools become suitable in scenarios in the gaming industry, which would have been totally unimaginable just a few months ago. Yes, I agree that the starting pool needs to be historical data, but it doesn't need to be enormous. With this reversion of the pyramid, if you wish, from bottom-up to top-down reasoning, our AI tools can give value even if you have limited data sets to feed it. I think a perfect example of this is what Google have been doing in their whole, AlphaGo Zero and AlphaZero models, whereby what used to take them months for training is done in a few hours, simply based on the different approach which we have to the learning process. So we should, in my view, not overemphasize the necessity
of hardware constraints or data constraints, because the innovation trajectory which we are on is seeing far more huge capabilities that we have in intelligence provision. And we've had some excellent results with gaming organizations which had very little historical data for us to go by. Yes, of course, it's an advantage when you have a vendor which has existing data sets from other operators, from other industries, which become applicable, let's say language models or language understanding models. But it still means that our capabilities are allowing us to fulfill far more business needs than a few months ago without large data sets. And that is where the eye of AI becomes intelligent.
That's a fantastic answer. That's something I was looking for. Personally, the concept of not teaching it, I find that so adverse. I just, as a person that's been in the industry, I have a need to, like go, this is how you do things. So it'll be incredibly interesting to see what the machine pool, what the machine can make sense out of a pool of unfiltered data, right? What kind of dynamic patterns, dynamic segments, behavioral patterns, because even the product, I always said the casino manager's mind or our sportsbook manager's mind is conditioned with the fact that we sit inside our domain knowledge bubble, right? Our perspective is from inside out, right? We don't actually have the perspective of the player outside in. So it's an incredibly interesting aspect to take a look at what the machine can learn and extract from just unfiltered pool of information. We're closing on. We've run out of time. I want to thank you for your time. I do hold on for the next chat. Talking about processing power, we're actually going to chat about neuromorphic computing, new kind of chip, following the neurons, the neuron pattern. Guys, thank you very much. This was very enjoyable for me. I hope you had a good time here. Yeah?
Thank you, Igor.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Igor.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Indeed. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time then. We had Johan, we had David, we had Gigi, and we also had Igor giving us some fantastic coverage there. And as David mentioned, AI played a really big role in processing large amounts of data fast. Now, Igor did cover then the fact that our next topic will be quantum and neuromorphic. Just before we do start, I would like to remind you to tune in tomorrow at 10 a.m. CET, where it'll be day 2 of SiGMA Asia Digital, and we'll also be taking a look at more of the iGaming sphere across Europe and also across Asia, touching on esports as well. And remember to tweet out to us any questions that you do have, and our content team will be getting back to you throughout the day. We really want to engage and give you as much content in these 4 hours per day as possible. Now let's go on to our next discussion. Quantum and Neuromorphic Computing with Steve Chow, founder and CEO, Turing Industries.
Hello and greetings to everyone at Deep Tech. This is Steve Chow from Turing Industries. We're going to talk about quantum computers and neuromorphic computing today. Quantum computers seems a little far-fetched. However, they're extremely promising. Back in 2019, Google claimed to have achieved quantum supremacy. That's a quantum computer with 53 qubits. What are qubits? Conventional computers uses bits, that's ones and zeros. Quantum computers uses qubits. It's able to perform 2 calculations at the same time with 1 qubit. With 2 qubits, the quantum computer is able to perform 4 calculations at the same time. That's 2 to the power of 2. A 53 qubits quantum computer may perform 2 to the power of 53 calculations simultaneously. Now, if suppose there's a quantum computer with 300 qubits, that means it's able to perform 2 to the power of 300 calculations at the same time. Now, that number is more than the number of atoms in the visible universe. So, as powerful as it seems, it comes with a little hurdle. For quantum computers to work, it needs to be cooled down to minus 237 degrees Celsius. close to absolute zero. That's not exactly practical for day-to-day usage. Therefore, quantum computers are used specifically for special tasks. It isn't built for general computing. Now, neuromorphic computing is a much better candidate for next-generation computation. The term was first conceived by Professor Carver Mead back in the 80s. It is describing the computation mimicking the human brain. Over the last decade, a number of companies and institutions have been working on neuromorphic computing. Take IBM as an example. The IBM True North chip. It's the first neuromorphic chip in the world that take on the non-von Neumann architecture. The True North chip has 4,096 cores. Each core contains 256 neurons. We're talking about 1 million neurons and over 250 million synapses. Now, this is a relatively new concept of computing. As I have just mentioned neuron, let's touch upon the biological aspect of this topic, the human brain. A typical human brain contains in between 86 to 87 billion neurons and 10 to the 15 power of synapse. Inside each neuron, we have the cell body, or soma. Surrounding the soma, we have the dendrites. Branching off the soma, we have the axon. At the end of the axon, we have the axon terminal. Now think of the dendrites as the antenna for receiving signals, and think of the axon terminals as the antenna for sending signals. The neurons within the human brain send signals by firing spikes at each other. It only fires spikes when the membrane potential reaches a certain value. Now, the spike doesn't necessarily fire at each propagation cycle. This is why when we perform a task, a computational task in our brain, we only consume a tiny fraction of our entire neuron count. This is the reason why the human brain is extremely power efficient. We consume 20 watts of power, and we're capable of achieving 1 exaflops. And let's put this into perspective. The world's fastest supercomputer, the IBM Summit, consumes 30 megawatts of power, and it's capable of 200 petaflops. The human brain consumes 20 watts of power and capable of 1 exaflops. That's 5 times the computational capacity of the IBM Summit. Neuromorphic computers, which uses neuromorphic computing, are directly modeled after the human brain. It uses a special artificial neural network methodology called spiking neural networks, or SNN. This is not to be confused with software-based algorithms such as convolutional neural networks, recurrent neural networks, or generative adversarial networks. Neuromorphic chips, which powers neuromorphic computers, may not replace conventional computational chips such as CPU, GPU, or application-specific ICs. However, neuromorphic computers has the ability to add to the existing computers that performs deep learning for artificial intelligence. From IBM True North to Intel Loihi to Manchester University's Spinnaker machine, every company or institution is working on a unique solution for neuromorphic computing chips. We at Turing Industries, we're also working on a special type of neuromorphic chip based on non-volatile memory chips. Non-volatile memory chips such as RRAM or phase change memory are special because when the power is down, the data stays. Unlike random access memory such as DRAM, the data is lost after the power is gone. This is particularly important for next generation artificial intelligence research, that is, artificial general intelligence. In terms of AGI, we first need to explore the possibility of artificial consciousness. Now, there are 2 aspects to consciousness. First, the unconscious. It's intuitive, it's fast, it's non-linguistic, it's habitual. However, it deals only with implicit type of knowledge. Whereas conscious, it's linguistic, it's algorithmic, It deals with reasoning and planning, an explicit type of knowledge. The non-volatile memory chip-based neuromorphic computing chips has the potential to tackle the reasoning and the planning of the conscious mind, which is important as a milestone for the next generation neuromorphic computing research. So, what does it all mean for us? What does it mean for iGaming in particular? Suppose we're able to conceive that kind of hardware and we're able to perform research on artificial consciousness. That means we'll be able to zero into the attention-based artificial intelligence without having to go through millions and trillions of data. We can just focus on the kind of data that really matters to us, like how we humans see things. We receive information and data at an astronomical rate on a daily basis. However, we have the ability to focus our attention on the ones that matters to us, and machines lack that kind of ability. In other words, if machines have that kind of ability, that means it will be able to create an intuitive experience for gamers online, and gamers will be able to enjoy and spend more time interacting with the machine as if there's a real person on the other side of the screen or the table. I've enjoyed sharing such knowledge with you, and maybe one day machines will be able to develop self-consciousness and share their knowledge with us. I don't think we have to worry about technological singularity. In the interim, what we should do is enjoy iGaming. Thank you so much. Thank you, Deep Tech.
Wow, Steve, that was some presentation. I'll be honest with you, some of that went whoosh, right over my head. The technology that you talk about is extremely interesting. There's a couple of things that I've picked up on that I wasn't very much aware of. One, that quantum computing is not only in existence, but it's functional and being used. I genuinely thought that was theoretical so far. And there's elements of that I'd really like to discuss with you. And secondly, this completely new terminology in neuromorphic computing, where it's highly interesting to see how we are mapping the human brain and how we are mapping neurons. I have questions in terms of whether it's biological, technical, nanotechnology, what's going on there. So there's two key areas, rolling on from the previous conversations I've just had, one being with an AI panel, and quite literally we've closed the topic on the amount of computing and processing power that we currently have in the technology today, where that is headed. And the second conversation that was just held by Jason Farrugia, CTO of MGA, which is a fantastic panel on cybersecurity and on encryption, on safeguarding the customer data. So those are the two core verticals I'd like to explore when we talk about the new computing capabilities. With me, Steve. Hi, welcome.
Thank you.
Great. There you are. How are you? Are you good? Can you hear me well?
Thanks a lot.
I'm losing you, Steve. Can you please repeat that?
I can hear you fine. Thanks very much.
There's a slight delay. Right. So, looking at quantum computing first and foremost, right? The amount of processing power that you've just described there seems staggering. And as somebody that has been on the receiving end of brute force attacks and DDoS attacks when I ran my casino operations, and has been on receiving end on the file locker hacks and various intrusive elements, one thing that would concern me is what happens with cryptography. Especially, I'm not talking military grade cryptography. I'm talking about standard e-commerce, the usual, 128 and 256-bit encryptions when they are confronted with machinery of this particular capacity. I mean, are we going to start seeing quantum computers in the hands of relatively rich private entities, which may not necessarily have the necessary regulation and safeguards, that NSA would have, or someone as big as Google. Where does quantum computing sit right now? I have a very similar question for neuromorphic computing as well, because obviously, as you've stated, the processing power, they seem to be competitive to one another. What is your take on that?
Okay, so as I talked about quantum supremacy that was achieved and claimed by Google last year, but we should really note that the current quantum computer is at 53 qubits. Now, to break a standard encryption technology such as RSA, you probably need over 10,000 qubits to crack the RSA. But not to mention that there's AES 256, and most of the seed private keys are being selected by the ECC algorithm. So I think this is still far out in terms of quantum computing being able to crack the cybersecurity. So I wouldn't worry too much about it.
You're saying we're safe. We're safe. We're good.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, very good. Okay. I mean, that was one question. I mean, the second part of the question was neuromorphic computing. So I understand. I mean, when I listen to your presentation, I imagine the environment in which or any entity is supposed to bring the temperature down to the absolute zero and so on. I can't imagine this rolling out in any form of commercial scale at any point in the near future. But when you talk about neuromorphic chip, you see that really threw me off. When you mention neuron, one of the things that kept bringing up, neuron is a biological element, right? I've watched the latest technology trying to store data on DNA, I think quite successfully. When you talk about the technology that produces this chip and its capacity, what are we looking at here? Is this nanotechnology? Is this a new form of wiring? Atom chips? I'm completely at a loss at what we are looking here in terms of what's coming out.
So neuromorphic chips are relatively new. Now, neuromorphic chips, it's largely based on the heterogeneous architecture. As opposed to quantum computer, the neuromorphic chip nowadays utilizes both the logic side of things, meaning the CPU type of capability for deep training. However, at the same time, it also drills into the reasoning and the planning aspect of the chip. So it's got the right brain of computation. It also has the left brain built into it. And different companies are working towards a solution to make it commercial at the moment.
So one thing that confused me was you, at one point in time, you've mentioned its ability to store data in its off state. Now that contradicts my understanding of processing itself, right? For me, conventional processing processes data that's stored in a database, right? When you look at the chip, are we looking at ability to store information as well and process it on that chip?
Yeah, that's called in-memory computation. So that's a topic that many institutions are trying to solve, the traditional von Neumann bottleneck, meaning when you have the processing and the data going back and forth, it loses data and it consumes a lot of power. Now with in-memory computing,
just understanding that the verticals rolling off from the previous AI conversation, the verticals that we're embarking on, it's almost scary. Okay, so if I understood this right, what's rolling on in very near future, and correct me if I'm wrong, quite frankly, exists as of today. IBM has developed that chip. That chip is currently in use, right? What is happening is a high enough degree of reasoning and computation capacity of a human brain stored in a chip. right? If I remember right from your presentation, you've explained the computational capacity of a human brain, and if I heard you right, comparatively, we're looking at a chip that can do 10-20% of that already as a single chip. Did I understand that right, or did I misunderstand that statement?
You implied it correctly, but I think we're still quite a few years off from mimicking the entire human brain's computation. At this moment, the only institution which have mimicked 1% of the human brain is Manchester University's Spinnaker project.
So 1% of the human brain, yeah?
Right now, which is like the equivalent of a mouse.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. But when I was looking at statistics, I said, did I hear this right? I wasn't 100% sure. I want to clarify that topic. So a couple of things that I extracted from this conversation that are very interesting to me is one, in-memory computing and the high ability for in-memory computing ties along incredibly well with real-time responsive design. So when we're looking at AI architectures, which need to respond to events, external events in real time, this is quite frankly the next frontier, I imagine. This is where we're headed.
Absolutely.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, I'm thinking iRobot here. I've gone there. but from the perspective of the use for the industry, I mean, this goes well beyond the gaming industry itself. But for the use from the industry, one of the closing conversations of the AI aspect was that we are inversing the learning mechanism. So we were talking about machine learning from the aspect of giving it certain variables and giving it certain information points and teaching it the basics of how to structure those information points to extract reasoned data, as opposed to allowing a machine an unfettered access to a data lake, to a pool of data, especially event-driven, yeah? Allowing it to stream through those events to find common denominating patterns and to reach conclusions. And that inverse approach to AI for me was sort of a long ways away, simply because I couldn't imagine a scenario where our processing capabilities and our database capabilities can sort of bring any realism to that aspect. But with what you're saying here now, we're a cornerstone away.
Well, actually, very close to achieving the sort of artificial general intelligence. So what you have just described is unstructured data or unsupervised training. Unsupervised training is particularly suitable for neuromorphic computing, especially in the realm of in-memory computing. I think we're only about 2-3 years off, far quicker than quantum computers.
Incredible. So commercially, is this anywhere close to being commercially available? I mean, how does this look like? Company wanting to embark on this. How does the availability of such technology even look like at this day and age right now?
Okay, I'm not trying to do a commercial on our company, but in about 2 to maximum 3 years, we will be able to offer this commercially. Most of the neuromorphic chips that you know out there, they are mainly for academic purposes. The IBM True North was specially built for DARPA, for the American Defense Ministry. And Intel Loihi is still in the academic research stage. But what we're working on is based on non-volatile memory, and this type of in-memory computing have already been sold to many clients already, not in the realm of neuromorphic, but in the realm of memory, non-volatile volatile memory itself. So we're about 2 to maximum 3 years out, and we're working exactly to bring it commercially available.
That's incredible. So 2-3 years from now, the world is going to change again. That's how it sounds.
Yeah.
Wow, amazing.
That's right.
We're out of time. Steve, thank you so much for that amazing presentation. Thank you for this conversation.
Thank you, Igor. Thank you, Deep Tech.
Have a lovely day.
See ya. Goodbye.
A very informative Q&A and presentation there. Thank you, Steve, and thank you to Igor. SiGMA Group have actually been following Steve for quite a while now, and we really appreciate the work that he's doing in the emerging tech space. If you haven't yet checked out AIBC's recent Block magazine, he actually is the front cover photo and focus, so I would advise you to go and have a look if you haven't already yet. Now we are coming to the end of the day. We have one more final panel to take a look at cybersecurity and tech, and also just a reminder on the SiGMA platform, do encourage and interact with other guests and speakers. We do want to hear from you. Any questions that you do have, we will get around to answering them on the platform and also on Twitter. So make sure to interact and we'll get back to you. Let's take a look at the next panel. Data and Cybersecurity with Jason Ferrugia, CTO, Malta Gaming Authority, and Gaurav Malawat, Solutions Engineering Team Lead Asian, Cloudflare.
Hi, today's session is about cybersecurity in the gaming industry. I'm Jason Ferrugia, the CTO of the Malta Gaming Authority. I've been working for approximately 9 to 10 years in the gaming industry with the Malta Gaming Authority. My background is in software development, but now since I'm the CTO, I handle other areas including software development, data security, and infrastructure. With me, I have Gaurav from Cloudflare. Maybe you can do the introduction, Gaurav.
Hi, my name is Gaurav. I am Solutions Engineer with Cloudflare. I manage the ASEAN team based out of Singapore office. I'm glad to be here.
Okay, so today we're discussing cybersecurity in the gaming industry. I mean, the gaming industry is a multi-billion-dollar global industry, and that, of course, attracts criminals. And with the COVID-19 situation, the closure of the physical casinos, there was also a halt in the sports betting. We've seen a huge shift to online casinos, making them more attractive to cyber criminals. In fact, online casinos, I mean, they are not simple e-commerce websites. They have more components than standard business. They have extensive databases containing customer data. They have multitude of gaming software. They have live gaming feeds, mobile virtual reality, AI chatbots, payment gateways, sign-up forms. I mean, they are also all potential opportunities for hackers and online fraudsters. So online casino operators need to ensure that each and every operation of their site is secure and protected, not just the login stage or the bet stage. In fact, I was reading some statistics published by a leading provider in cybersecurity, whereby in a 17-month period between 2017 and 2019, hackers have targeted the gaming industry by carrying out 12 billion credential stuffing attacks against gaming websites. This puts the gaming community among the fastest rising targets for credential stuffing attacks, and one of the most lucrative targets for criminals looking to make a quick profit. I mean, these statistics also reveal that SQL injection attacks now represent nearly 2/3 of all the web application attacks, around 65%. This is not just a data loss issue, which, of course, on its own is a huge GDPR concern because of the requirements there are, but also other repercussions such as system downtime, making it unavailable to the customers, to the players, the bad reputation that you will have, and worse than that is the game integrity. I mean, I wouldn't place a bet with a company that was hacked. I mean, who knows what happened to the RNG, for example. So game integrity is also critical. Now, shifting to Gaurav, what are the cybersecurity trends and role of data in cybersecurity nowadays? Maybe you can take us through it.
Yeah, so at Cloudflare, we see traffic from 26 million properties. So as people are going through some sort of lockdown, the internet usage has increased. Obviously, more people are using internet for shopping, playing games, working remotely. So we have seen anywhere from 20 to 40% increase in terms of the internet usage worldwide. At the same time, we have also seen an increase in number of cyber attacks. So at Cloudflare, one of the things which we do is provide DDoS mitigation, so protecting from distributed denial of service attacks. So what we have seen in the Q1 is there is a considerable increase in number of cyber attacks, especially DDoS attacks, and the duration of those attacks. So one of the interesting trend is we have seen attacks which are less than 500 megabytes per second. So what hackers are doing is they're using smaller and small scale attacks to basically target multiple domains. So that's one of the trends we are seeing. Now, obviously, nowadays with the rise of IoT devices, it is very much easy to launch an DDoS attack. So as some of you might have heard about the Mirai botnet, for example, where the attackers used or hacked security or CCTV cameras to launch a DDoS attack. So there are tools available. And obviously, there is an incentive to cyber criminals. So sometimes it's financial incentive. Sometimes it could be, there are government-sponsored attackers as well. So we are seeing an increase in number of DDoS attacks through our network. Now the question is, how do you protect from these kind of attacks? So what we have seen at Cloudflare is data is very, very important in order to mitigate such attacks. So the two major players or the two source of headaches are bots and phishing domains. So the bots, at any given time, we see more than 60% of the internet traffic coming from bots. Obviously, not all bots are bad. There are good bots, for example, search engine crawlers like Google, which everybody wants to cater to. But at the same time, the attackers deploy sophisticated bots to target the websites to bring it down. So, for example, stuff like credential stuffing or content spam is usually done with the help of these bots. So at Cloudflare, we see 26 million properties. We have 11 million requests per second going through our network. So what we try to do is we look into 250 request attributes and then use that data to essentially score every request that goes through our network. So with the help of this data and machine learning, we are able to identify if the request is coming from a human or a bot. So in context of Cloudflare, data is extremely important. The second area of concern is phishing domains. So now with the COVID situation, obviously attackers are taking use of the situation. So they use various tactics to basically have a user click on a phishing link. So although the right thing to do is obviously train your employees and have some sort of social engineering knowledge, but at the same time, from a technical standpoint, it is important to protect a user once they happen to click on a phishing domain. So one thing we do at Cloudflare is we take threat intelligence data from various sources, and so if one of your employees happen to click on a phishing domain, and if they're using Cloudflare Gateway, which is the solution we call it, then you are able to protect that user from accessing that phishing domain. So obviously, like we are seeing more and more attacks, and we are leveraging data in order to fight those attacks.
Okay. So next, I want to talk a bit about the security compliance challenges that we have nowadays. The first challenge that I want to talk about is ethics and compliance. A lot of data that is used to gain insights can be attributed to personal individuals. Personally identifiable information can be found everywhere nowadays, sometimes even in unexpected places. Many consumers are not aware of how their data, their personal data is being used and what companies are doing with it. Concerns about the use of big data are also leading to ever stricter regulations on how the companies can collect, store, and use such information. Big data magnifies the security, the compliance, and the governance challenges that apply to normal data that we're used to. In addition to, of course, increasing the potential impact of data breaches. So organizations have to comply with regulations and legislation when collecting and processing data. I mean, while data protection legislation around the globe differs in certain aspects, it all shares the same basic principles. It's all about taking care of personal information, data privacy, and controlling how data is being used. Users have to be able to understand what data is being collected, the processing of the data, and it has to also be legitimized by, of course, user consent. Looking at the sheer amount of data companies have to process, protecting and managing this data is becoming more and more complicated nowadays. In fact, another challenge is poor data management, when basically there is no clear ownership for big data and there's poor control over its life cycle. Then data management, of course, becomes a true challenge. In fact, many companies tend to see security as a technology issue, meaning that, security is just another requirement that IT departments have to fulfill. And of course, it's a problem that can be solved by just buying yet another security solution, another piece of software or hardware. But great data governance is more than that. It starts at the top level, at the board level, at the executive level. They have to define the business goals for the use of big data together with, of course, the acceptable risk and the compliance requirements there are. There must be clearly defined responsibilities for the data, and its life cycle must be properly managed. In fact, to comply to data privacy regulations, the companies must be able to audit the way that the data is acquired, processed, analyzed, and secured, as well as the way the outcomes of the analytics, the data analytics are being used. Another challenge that we encounter nowadays is insecure infrastructure. Security by design is great, but looking at the vast amount of devices and infrastructure that produce data nowadays, many of them aren't constructed with security in mind, especially when it comes to these IoT devices. The limited ability to resist cyber attacks becomes even more problematic. Sometimes, in fact, you cannot even update or upgrade their defense mechanism. So that makes it, of course, more difficult to be in line with the latest cybersecurity trends. This could also, this could not only impact the trustworthiness of the data, it could also give the hackers the access to vulnerable infrastructure. In addition to this, the technology that is used to process this data was designed with massive scalability in mind, but not necessarily to enforce the security controls. So while the absence of security by design is nothing new, the complex big data environments only make things worse. There are enough vulnerabilities and backdoors in on-premises big data analytics environments, but with the use of cloud services, especially when it comes to these hybrid or multi-cloud environments, we've reached another level of complexity with new challenges, new risks. So, in fact, using out-of-the-box security delivered by the cloud providers and improperly set security controls can lead to exposed data on the internet. Also, additionally, data sent to cloud services is often unprotected, unfortunately. In fact, a lot of data breaches have occurred because the simplest countermeasures were not existent or not integrated properly within their infrastructure. To make sure this doesn't happen to you, adopting a privacy by design approach is crucial. You have to make sure that your data management is under control and that the data is protected anywhere it is used, stored, or in motion. Another thing is, what I'd like to suggest is pseudonymize whenever possible. Storing data about the person's identity is normal, but of course you should store it in an area that is fully partitioned and separate from other user data, so that if it gets tampered, at least the pseudonymization should help that the player data or the customer data is not identifiable. What I would like to ask you, Gaurav, now is what is the role of Cloudflare in meeting these compliance requirements that we have nowadays?
Yeah, so thanks for elaborating the challenges with regards to data security. So as you mentioned, now companies are deploying a multi-cloud and hybrid environment. So it's no longer just the data center where your data resides. And at the same time, from the user perspective, you are deploying multiple SaaS applications. Your users are accessing those applications not just from your physical like desktop machines, but they are accessing from mobile devices, from anywhere in the world, right? So the challenge, so basically the network has evolved, which requires you to adopt a new approach and new architecture in order to keep your data safe. So one of the things which we do at Cloudflare is we offer encryption end-to-end. So the first thing in order to make sure your data is safe is to use encryption to avoid any man-in-the-middle attacks. So back in 2014, Cloudflare made certificates free for all of the customers. We thought that was one of the reasons. The certificate cost was one of the obstacles for customers to use encryption. And with the free certificates, now everybody has that security. The second thing is, so as I mentioned, now your data resides in multiple environments. And there are, of course, vulnerabilities like SQL injection, which can be exploited by the hackers or attackers in order to get hold of that data. So having a solution like Web Application Firewall in front of your infrastructure is a good strategy to protect your data from application layer vulnerabilities. So at Cloudflare, we provide a fully managed web application firewall, which is something which we constantly update as we discover new vulnerabilities. So having a WAF in front of infrastructure will ensure that the hackers are not able to exploit vulnerabilities which might be there on your application. The next thing is now you also have to take care of the access to your applications. So far I was talking about securing your infrastructure with the help of encryption and WAF, but on the user side, you want to ensure that you are deploying the right controls, the right access controls, so that there is no insecure access to those applications. Now, one of the solutions which traditionally everybody uses is VPN. However, there are challenges with that approach. For example, now most of the workforce is working remotely, so that doesn't really scale very well. And also, as I mentioned, now there are multiple SaaS applications which are being deployed by every company. So the right solution, in our opinion, to protect your applications is to use a zero trust solution. So instead of relying on a network, you have to rely on the user identity. So using an identity management solution with a zero trust solution is the right way to make sure that you have correct access controls on your applications. The other thing about zero trust solution is it scales very well, and there is more control in terms of the application access. For example, in every organization, we use various set of applications. Everybody should not have access to every application. So using a zero trust solution, it's very easy to make sure that you're only giving access to the people who should have that access. The final thing is protecting your devices and the data which leaves your network, right? So again, as I mentioned, now that your workforce is remote, it's no longer your corporate network which needs to be secured. You also have to secure the devices from where the users are accessing this data, right? So typically there are like secure gateway solutions which will inspect the traffic leaving your network, right? So I mentioned about the phishing domains. So one of the things you can do is use a gateway solution like Cloudflare Gateway to make sure that if the employee happens to click on a phishing link by mistake, then the access to that domain is blocked at the gateway level so that you don't run into the future problems. So in a nutshell, I think organizations have to think about how should they protect users, devices, and their infrastructure, and then utilize the tools to ensure the data sovereignty and data integrity.
In fact, I was going to mention that we're not quite at a point where machines can combat all cybercrime on their own. But I mean, through the help of artificial intelligence as well, nowadays we've seen significant advances in that direction. Unfortunately, we only have 20 minutes for this session allocated, so we have to conclude here. We have to basically end up this one. Maybe a conclusion from your end, Gaurav, as well, and we can conclude.
Yeah, so I think so with the rise in the number of cyber attacks, I think organizations have to think about their cybersecurity postures and make sure they have right tools and controls in place to mitigate these threats and secure their data. So looking at solutions offered by Cloudflare and the similar companies would be a good start. And if you want to know more about what we do at Cloudflare, I'm happy to connect with you and share more information.
Thanks a lot. And with this one, we end up this session. Thank you. Thank you, SiGMA, for having us.
Thank you.
Well, that was our final panel for SiGMA Deep Tech. Jason, Gaurav, thank you so much for your insights, and thank you to our sponsors, Cloudflare, for sponsoring our SiGMA Deep Tech. That's all for day one of SiGMA Asia Digital and SiGMA Deep Tech. We hope you enjoyed the day as much as we did. Now, if you did miss any of today's segments, they will be available on SiGMA TV's YouTube as of tomorrow. So I invite you to go watch and reshare. If you've learned something interesting, do pass it on. Now, just a little bit of a recap of what's up over the next few days. As of tomorrow, 10 a.m. CT, we will be back with SiGMA Asia Digital. We have 4 hours of exclusive content with some amazing speakers to bring to you. After that, we will go from 2:30 p.m. CET all the way through to 4:30 on SiGMA Deep Tech once again. And then after that, we have our poker tournament where you can still register on sigma.com.mt and you can play poker with the rest of the SiGMA friends and family. There is also a $250 bounty on SiGMA Group's CEO and founder Ayman Pulis's head. If you manage to knock him or some of the other SiGMA teams out of the competition, you will be rewarded. So that's a little bit of fun and some networking along the way. On Wednesday, we will have our AIBC Summit from 10 till 2 CET. So I invite you to tune in for that and our final day of SiGMA Deep Tech. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you all again tomorrow.
We have an important announcement to make. I am very excited to launch SiGMA Latam. That's right, a third summit in Latin America that will complement SiGMA in Europe and SiGMA in Asia.
Tenemos una fuerza laboral fuerte en Malta, en Kiev y en Manila. Es hora de que SiGMA aumente nuestra cartera y se expanda más allá de nuestra zona de confort, cubriendo todas las horas horarias con las nuevas oficinas en las Américas.
As cidades cotadas foram Buenos Aires e São Paulo. Acabamos escolhendo a segunda por duas razões.
Reason number one, there's always a great presence of media and events in offices in Buenos Aires, and we don't want to replicate more or of the same or compete with our friends.
Segunda, o grande potencial de mercado e a atual possibilidades de regulamentação de jogos no Brasil nos darão mais motivos para decidir estabelecer nosso escritório lá.
Brazilian Federal Deputy Pompeo de Matos, for instance, believes casinos will be a vaccine for coronavirus, stating that taxing gaming money could jumpstart the country's economy in the wake of COVID-19.
Ele machuca a economia. E eu diria assim, para nós até ajudar a levantar a economia depois que passar a pandemia, uma das alternativas é, inclusive, legalizar os jogos. É uma alternativa perfeitamente possível, viável, eu diria assim, até necessária.
Assuntos como este, dentre outros, farão parte dos nossos debates em setembro.
Moving forward, We hope that our 3 pillar shows, SiGMA in Malta, SiGMA in Manila, and eventually SiGMA in Sao Paulo, will pave the way for iGaming communities to learn from, as well as do business with each other. I look forward to contribute to this and make iGaming truly a global phenomenon.